Welcome to the Office of Children's Mental Health Trauma-Informed Care Training. The topic of this section is working with people with different racial and cultural backgrounds. This is the third segment in our Exploring Race and Culture from a Trauma-Informed Lens series. I'm Ricky Ferrari Trainer, a section manager within the Wisconsin Department of Children and Families, and I will be moderating our panel discussion. And now I would like to introduce our panelists. Our first panelist is Boyana Zorich-Martinez, Director of the Bureau of Refugee Programs and Wisconsin State Refugee Coordinator at the Wisconsin Department of Children and Families. Next is Pablo Navarro, Owner, Director, and Professional Counselor with Navarro Professional Counseling Services, and Robert Kaminsky, Lived Experience Partner with the Wisconsin Office of Children's Mental Health and Certified Parent-Peer Specialist. Welcome to each of you, and thank you for being here and sharing your expertise on the topic of implicit bias and working with people with different backgrounds. Before we start our discussion, we want to acknowledge that what we are discussing could make you uncomfortable and feel vulnerable. We encourage you to embrace that. We want this to be a safe place. And for our panelists as well as those listening, your experience is really important. And if anything you hear in the discussion is challenging or harmful to you, we encourage you to take care of yourself. So as we begin the discussion, our working with people with different racial and cultural backgrounds, let's start by asking, how do you effectively work with clients that do not speak the same language or have a different culture, religion, or identity? Boyana, this is particularly relevant to your work that you do with refugees. Will you start us out on this question?
Yes, of course. Thank you, Ricky. Thanks for having me on this very important and a great panel with all of my colleagues here. Thank you so much again for allowing me to share some of my experience. So as the State Refugee Coordinator for a great state of Wisconsin, I have the honor and the pleasure to serve and to help coordinate refugee resettlement in our state and to represent our state before the federal partners, national and local stakeholders as well. So within my role, I get to work with a lot of different people and people of different backgrounds. And so if you're watching the news or if you've been in the know of what's going on worldwide in the last 6 months at least, you know that there's a lot of turmoil, unfortunately, there, and there's a lot of refugees out there. And we have been welcoming in our state refugees for almost 50 years. But most recently, we've been responding to the Afghan crisis that had brought some 13,000 refugees to our state, at least temporarily, but some of them have stayed in our state. And then we're now witnessing what's happening in Ukraine that will maybe, probably, or most likely bring some of the people from those parts of the world as well. So again, we work with a lot of different people from a lot of different backgrounds in our state. I have come here to the US as a refugee myself. I came here when I was 18, didn't speak a word of English, didn't know anything about the American culture, and very quickly got thrown into this new culture that sometimes likes to make assumptions. And so I remember being asked if I knew what a toothbrush is, or if I knew what a toilet was, and things like that when I first came here. And you know, those first initial reactions are hard to swallow for somebody who's, you know, seen the world. And so again, I think what we as the society sometimes lack to do is learning about the different culture. And so again, going back to the current events and everything that's been going on worldwide and how we've been seeing people come to our state, I have experienced a lot of people who are willing to help in different ways. And I would say that starting by learning somebody's culture, learning about, you know, their traditions, their religion, their food, are those things that really makes us make the cultural humility, makes us, you know, who we are as humans and who we are as welcomers and as people who want to make sure that our new neighbors are understood and treated well. So we need to be willing to listen, learn, be patient, give space, and approach people who we don't know or cultures we don't know with an open mind.
Yeah, I'm gonna go right off of that. You know, we did foreign adoption with a couple of our kids, and we were in the country of Poland, and I totally agree with the assumptions. We went over there, we had assumptions, and we very quickly learned humility was a big one, and vulnerability and anxiety. We could not speak the language. It was not our culture. The religion was different than what we practice. And, you know, it was one of those things that patience and listening very careful, and body language. We communicate so much through our body language. I think it's an untapped resource as far as a language. You're able to bond so well over that. But the curiosity, we needed to have that curiosity of trying different things. We needed to have the curiosity to go where typically we probably wouldn't. We had to embrace uncomfortability, our own uncomfortability in the situation. We had to embrace it. We had to just see where do things go, and we had to have trust. That was a really big one. You know, when you're in a culture that you're not familiar with, we learn very quickly how much we have to trust. And you really learn quickly that the world is just full of good people. If you trust them, they're going to take care of you. And that's exactly what we embraced. And we learned so much. It was so enriching being in a different country, having all this going on. It was scary. And I can't imagine, you know, when we talk about international adoptions or refugees, how scary that is from their point of view. And we have to be putting ourselves in that situation. We were in that situation, just like you, Brianna. Being in that situation really gives you a different perspective.
Thank you, Rob and Brianna. Really appreciate your words. And so to move on, we're gonna change focus a bit. We want to ask, what do we do when we've had a challenge to a relationship with a client? What can we do to build or rebuild that trust? Stepping alongside this is how we avoid perpetuating trauma, re-traumatization, and breaking that trusting relationship that we have worked so hard to establish. Pablo, will you start us off by sharing your thoughts on this?
Absolutely, Ricky. Thank you very much. Ideally, we would build relationships, and the relationships would remain safe, and we would always have continuation of safety. But the reality is that that's not always the case. So the extent to which we can, in the beginning, talk about differences and really recognize that there are some differences here in this room, and prep so that if there's disruption, we can then pick right back up and then work to repair. So looking for cues of safety, giving cues of safety in the relationship, genuinely being interested in the experience of others, recognizing that we see the world through different lenses depending on our own personal experiences, and really having those conversations up front can be very, very helpful should there be a disruption in the relationship for us to repair. Now, this is all physiologically, this is all wired, right? We're wired to keep ourselves safe. We're scanning the world so that we are safe, and that is why we have stayed alive, and that is why evolution, revolution has taught us. And so thinking about it from a physiological point of view, we are always looking for safety. Relationships are very much a dance of the nervous system. And if the next person does not feel safe in the context of the relationship, naturally that person will try to protect themselves. So the extent to which we can have those conversations up front, understand that it is a physiological thing, allowing us to really remove judgment and trying to really genuinely, again, being interested in the experience of the next person can really help us build those relationships and repair those relationships when, for whatever reason, they're disrupted.
Great, thank you. We touched on this, but I'd like to specifically address, how do you check your own personal beliefs at the door so that we don't enter a meeting or appointment or visit with the client or others with those personal assumptions leading the way? And if Rob, if you could start us off.
All right, thank you, Ricky. You know, this is something that is tough for me. Growing up in Northeast Wisconsin, during the time period that I grew up with, in our family, we were taught to fear basically whatever was different, whether it be culture, religion, whatever it is. You were kind of taught to fear it. As I grew older, I started to fear what I was taught. So for me, this is something I consciously have to work on all the time. But at the same time, my curiosity, wanting to continue to grow and learn is really helps me, because I love to learn about new cultures. I love to just meet new people and to hear their life story. Because each and every one of us are our own culture. And then we spread that culture to our families of culture. And then we can spread that to our community. And each of those layers is for me, helps me to really embrace who that person is. But I had to go through a time period where I just had to face my fears.
Yeah, similar for me. I do want to add that, you know, a lot of times we put people in these buckets and we feel like, well, if you're this, then you must be experiencing this. And if you're this, you must be experiencing that, and so on. And that's not always true. So my experience of being a refugee, being persecuted, coming to this country may be different from somebody else. And I found that over my 3 years of experience working with refugees in both professional and personal capacity, is that while there are some assumptions that are made, like learning the language and not knowing the culture outside of Beverly Hills 90210, which is so true, but anyhow, you know, you're thinking, well, you must experience the same thing, and that's so not true. So it is important to check our biases. It is important to check our beliefs at the door as we're entering an appointment. I can tell you that a few years ago, pre-pandemic, I went to a conference in Michigan, and every single cab driver was a foreigner. And so at first I started, you know, like, hey, where are you from? Because I feel like we share something, right? But then I thought, wait a minute, this is total microaggression. Like, why am I assuming that just because somebody has an accent or looks different than me or than majority of people is from somewhere else, right? So then, while I almost felt like always teased by that and wanting to learn more about other people, I had to check myself and think about, how much do they get this? Do they get this from everyone that enters this cab? Like, how how does that make them feel? So again, it is really important for us to check our biases, our beliefs, and our experiences at the door, because they may not be the same. We want to listen and we want to learn.
Yeah, Brianna, I think that when as I'm hearing you say these things, what came for me was the intentional exercise that I engaged in order to go to a mosque and get to know folks who look different than I do, who love people differently than I do, who pray to a God in ways that are differently than my ways. And it's taken a lifetime for me to really prep so that I am able to catch myself making those assumptions, and then being able to hopefully ever better able to talk about it on the spot and recognize that I just made that assumption, and really talk about what does it mean for our relationship? What does it mean for me to have this awareness now? Because of my professional background, I really think about the world from the lens of interpersonal neurobiology. So what are the ways in which we are wired in order to stay alive? How does that help us not perpetuate and re-traumatize folks, right? And it's an exercise. It is not something that I haven't found a recipe to use other than intentionally getting to know folks and cultures and food and that which is different than me. And recognizing when I actually make those assumptions. It's also a great exercise too.
Yeah, this is essentially courage that's required, right? This is good work that requires a lot of intestinal fortitude. So my next question is, how can our organizations help us in this work? I know this is a broad question, and different organizations can answer this in different ways. But hearing from each of you, will you provide some tangible examples? Boyana, we'll start with you.
Sure, absolutely. So I'll take this in the direction of maybe a little bit of a trauma-informed care and the culture, just because, again, the work that I do is very much about helping people overcome some of that trauma and then become self-sufficient in their new environment. So, you know, when we first started talking at the Department of Children and Families about trauma-informed care and creating that trauma-informed culture, I was like, you know, we're not only trauma-informed, we're trauma-induced. You know, that's who we are. That's the Bureau of Refugee Programs. We live this. This is our life. This is our work. And therefore, you know, I got this. But no, you really have to be very intentional with the work that we do. So there's been a number of different things that the network of refugee service providers, but then also within the Department of Children and Families, again, there's been a lot of things that we do. So I can share a couple of things or a few things. Right now, we're working on establishing a statewide mental health provider network to help our service providers be more trained on dealing with trauma-informed culture, creating trauma-informed culture, and really how do we process and how do we work with people who've experienced trauma. And this doesn't only go for refugees, it goes for regular, you know, just for other vulnerable populations as well. But I think it's very important that we take that component into consideration, is that these people have gone through different things and have experienced different things and have a lot of different things to bring with them. And therefore, we need to consider that as we are providing services. Within the Department of Children and Families, we are continuing the work on the trauma-informed care policy and procedures, again, to help specifically people who are working on the front lines, regardless if it's child protective services or if it's refugee work or childcare in general, whatever the case might be. We're really focusing on how do we, you know, focus or how do we intentionally focus on these types of things to make sure that kids specifically, but families as well, are taken care of and are loved members of the society. There's a lot of mental health consideration that we have not done before. Like, for example, I remember when 9/11 happened, we are, we were all scrambling to figure out how do we provide the support to all the service providers and the refugees themselves. So we're now in a little bit of a better place. So we're focusing on that a little bit more. And then lastly, we're giving space for mindfulness and space for employees and everyone that provides care to refugees and other immigrants to really think about their own self-care.
Thank you for bringing that up, Anna. That's something that we focus so much here for us too. We think about it in terms of institutionally, what can the institution do in order to support folks that are coming to us with this rich diversity, right? For us to really capitalize on the experience of folks who have lived through so much, yet at times have barriers that are pretty high up. And so what are the ways in which we're able to remove barriers to success so that folks that may live in a neighborhood where their car insurance may be cheaper compared to folks who live in the neighborhood where their car insurance is very expensive, institutionally, how do we remove that barrier then? Right? Even professional insurance. For those of us that work in different ways, the cost for us to operate, it's really, really different depending on who you are. So we think about it from that perspective, removing barriers to success. And then we think about how do we internally build a culture where we're really supporting one another, right? We are valuing that which we bring with all of the richness of our diversity. We're building small teams so that folks have point persons to go to on a weekly basis or on the spot when they need additional support, and really carving paid time at all times for folks to really continue to do the work, both supporting others and being supported. But
Thank you, Pablo. You know, I totally agree. And I think the organizations, one of the things they can do is just start providing positions for the lived experience. For, one of the programs we have in the state, and I don't know if a lot of people know about, but we got certified peer specialists, we got certified peer specialists, and being able to incorporate that into what you're doing when you're working in the community. That way you don't start making these assumptions, because you're collaborating with somebody who's been there. And now I think that makes the transition to the community a lot better. And one of the things I really enjoy about being a certified peer specialist is working with that organizations. They have that community of practice opportunities where we get to continue to enrich ourselves about different cultures and their cultural identities. And it helps to prepare us as we're entering into the community. So once again, that we can kind of be rid of ourselves of some of that assumptions that we make as we go out in the community, and also just so it gives us that confidence and just that natural curiosity of, okay, I know a little bit, I heard a little bit, I want to learn more.
Yeah, great. Thank you, all three of you. And that helps break down the silos that discourage community integration and involvement in the work that we're doing. Yeah, great, thanks. Unfortunately, we have to wrap up. So to wrap up our discussion, I would like each of you to share what the number one thing is that you want people to think on this topic for working with people that have different racial or cultural backgrounds. I'll actually share mine first, and then we will turn to our panelists. So I always like to say time is relative. So I always like to encourage people to find the time and find the money to do the good work, right? And finding a way to better work with individuals from different backgrounds is that good work. So because a lot of barriers come up from agencies and institutions that act as if they have to compete for time or money in order to provide services, and that kind of goes against the collective impact work that we need to do to help our families thrive. And we have to decide, make the choice, be courageous, right? Have courage to do what is uncomfortable and to be vulnerable in order to make it so that our services are better and evolve to the point where they serve people well. Because this work is so important, it's so meaningful, and the time and the money are there, and it's up to us to kind of look for that and develop it. Pablo, what is one thing that you would like to emphasize?
Thank you, Ricky. I'm thinking one thing that I think is extremely important for us to remember is really, which will help us removing judgment for ourselves and for others, is that our bodies, our brains, are keeping us safe at all times. By understanding that all of us are really doing the best we can physiologically at any point in time, we're able to recognize that it is true, we will look for differences in others. It's also true that intentionally we can get to know and celebrate those differences. And by doing so, we get to really remove judgment. Sometimes we need to repair, we repair. And when folks are also in need to repair, we're able to actually see the humanity in everyone and work to make this a better world.
Thank you, Pablo. To sum this up in one is a tough. You know, for me, is making myself vulnerable, putting myself uncomfortable position, but realizing the opportunity to learn so much more about others and to be able to enrich in my own story of you know, everybody that I know, and passing their stories on through me to as it becomes part of my story. The biggest thing that I want to say is we really do have to move away from assumptions. We do have to move away from, as Pablo says, you know, we're going to see differences, but he summed it up beautifully in the fact that that's what makes us, that's what enriches us. That's what makes us so beautiful in each and every way. And we really do need to embrace that.
Yeah, I think I 100% share your feelings and your opinions on this. I have two little ones. I have two toddlers, and while I think they're learning from us as adults as to what to do, what not to do, and things like that, I feel like I actually am learning from them a lot more. And I think going back to those curious things of, you know, Mama, why this? Mama, why that? And it's constant, is really where we need to start. Curiosity is really, really, really important. But in a way to be respectful with that and be genuine with that curiosity. It's not hard. It's not hard to open up our hearts and our minds and our ears to listening. Just listening and learning. Just try. And you're not going to go wrong. People appreciate people wanting to know more. People appreciate people who are curious, who genuinely want to know what is going on, why is something happening, what makes them different, special, whatever the case might be. I do feel that we do more harm than we do good if we go with those assumptions that were just mentioned here, but rather to, again, being curious, remaining curious, being respectful, and wanting to learn, just wanting to listen and learn. That's what I would say.
That was great. Thank you all. Thank you all of our panelists for sharing yourselves with us today and your invaluable insights. As viewers, we want to remind you that this is a tough and challenging material. We encourage you to be courageous while taking care of yourself and your mental health. Thank you for taking part in this discussion, and on the behalf of the Office of Children's Mental Health, be courageous.